Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and today our topic is Uranus Ingress into Gemini. And my friend and fellow astrologer Justin Elzie is joining me. Welcome, Justin. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Liz. I'm excited to talk about Uranus and ingressing into Gemini
Me too.
with you.
So, Justin is an archetypal and Jyotish astrologer, teacher, author, and Buddhist. The best way to reach him is his email address, justin.elzie@gmail.com. And I'm an astrologer, author, and numerologist, certified relationship astrologer, and Dwarf Planet University graduate. And my website is alightpath.com. And we both enjoy hearing from everybody. And here we're going to talk about Uranus, revolutionary, innovative, and about sudden change. So, Justin, can you lead us through some of the Uranus facts?
Sure. So, Uranus is in Greek mythology was the god of the sky, and it was the only planet not named after a Roman god. So, usually in the mythology of the planets, we have this combination of Roman and Greek naming of the gods. And usually if there's a planet or an asteroid that's named after, there's a Greek name for it, there's a Roman name for it. And the orbit is about 84 years, about 7 years in a sign. It does vary, so people want to look that up because it is variance. It's the modern ruler of Aquarius, and it's traditionally ruled by Saturn. The Aquarius is. And then Uranus is an ice giant. It has 13 rings, as we know today, and it spins on its side, actually. It's an odd planet. Kind of, again, about the archetype of Uranus is about rebellion, revolution, and change. It spins different than the other planets. It wanted to be different, and so the rings aren't like this, they're like this. And that's the way the planet spins. So the themes for it are rebellion, revolution, and change, and it can represent in a person's chart their uniqueness, their skills, what makes them unique, and has a genius effect, shows a person's originality. It represents expression and freedom. Usually, if people have it in a particular fire sign like Sagittarius, they need their independence and freedom really heavily. It can represent independence, invention, definitely the liberation and breakdown and breakthrough technology. And I put the 9 muses because it does represent some skill set in people's charts. So, for example, if a person has Uranus in Sagittarius, we find this indicator a lot in poets or people that do poetry or lyrics or unusual philosophies. If we see it in Scorpio, Uranus in Scorpio, there's a mathematical, sometimes even a musical mathematical frequency and degree skill set in the chart. If a person has Uranus in Cancer, they'll tend to go outside the bounds of traditional family and include like their best friend like family. So they're kind of, it's about this unusualness, and when we compare it to each sign, there's something, and that's why I put the 9 muses there. The caution with Uranus, of course, is destruction, recklessness, sort of risk taking. Especially when it's combined with Mars or Pluto. It can represent extremism, impatience, nonconformity, restlessness, detachment, and unpredictability. So, did I forget anything, Liz?
Well, it's also known, well, it says rebellion, but it's also known as the rebel. So, I think we covered it pretty well, so we can't remember everything. So, Uranus in Gemini, Uranus goes into Gemini on July 7th. Will stay in Gemini until May 22nd of 2033. Pretty much almost a 8-year cycle because it's going to retrograde. So it'll be in Gemini until November 7th when it's retrograding back into Taurus. Then it will re-enter Gemini on April 26th of 2026 until August of 2032 when Uranus will touch into Cancer for a brief time and then will complete its cycle from December of 2032 through May of 2033. And the prior Uranus cycle, which was 84 years ago, was from August 7th through October 5th of 1941. Then it went retrograde, and then it came back into Gemini May 15th, 1942 through August of 1948. And then was getting ready for the next sign, but, backed in November of 1948 through June of 1949. So planets go direct and retrograde, so they do their little bouncing back and forth. So Justin's going to share Uranus and Gemini themes with us.
Yeah, so one note of that 1941 through 49 period. So when we look at different periods of the outer planets, Liz, I'm not sure about you, but I always like to see, okay, what happened in history in those times. And if we look back at the 19, because Uranus represents rebellion, revolution, and change and technologies, new ways of thinking, especially in communications and transportation. If we look back at that period that you just mentioned there, 1941 to 49, we saw a couple of really interesting things happen there. We saw the invention of the transistor, which was revolutionary. We also saw the first flight of the first jet engine in 1941. It actually had been invented like a year or two before, but it was actually first tested in 1941, the jet engine. Also, the Jeep was came about at that particular time. And we, of course, that became a car that's never a vehicle that's never went away. So there's been a lot of really, and I should not say also the atomic bomb. So there was a lot of revolutionary stuff with technology during that period.
Thanks for sharing that with us. So I'll let you get back to the themes of Uranus and
Yeah,
Gemini.
so so when we look at the themes, it's it's going to revolutionize communications, education, transportation, and thinking, especially because it is in Gemini. It's about new mental ways of thinking and new ways of communications, because Gemini rules communications and mental processes. So new ways of thinking with new concepts in science, literature. So we could think of AI, and of course, a lot of stuff with biology is happening right now, and space. And then, of course, new literature, electronics, and media are going to change even more so than we have. We'll probably see I would say by 2033, the whole iPhone looks totally different. We're already on the bounds. They're already looking at changing it majorly. And every area of our lives is going to change with new ways of living. And I mean, people come back later and see this, and they're going to say, "Yep, yep, Liz and Justin were right. New ways of thinking." And it's also going to change our communities, how we set up our communities, cities, and neighborhoods. It's going to be an era of restlessness, chaos, and invention. So strap in. If you're an inventive type, it's a really great time. Also, we could see some really unusual, speaking of literature, if a person's a writer, we could see some really unusual writing and books come out during that time period.
Well, I would agree with you. And I read somewhere that with the science and technology making leaps and bounds, that if we live the next 5 or 10 years, that the average age to live will be over 100 years old. So that'll be interesting to see if that comes
Yeah.
out. But it could. It's very possible. And our transportation is changing big time, because I mean, they have electric cars, but they're talking about hydrogen cars again, because I think it was the late 50s that they had some hydrogen cars, but they
Mhm.
didn't put it in production. But maybe they'll improve on that and put it in production now.
Yeah. And you know what I just heard the other day? I'm not sure if you know what Naropa University is. That's the Buddhist university out of Boulder. They're actually closing their brick and mortar campus, a beautiful campus, and it's all going online. So we
Wow.
may start to see, yeah, that was just a shocker to me, of Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado, going totally online learning now. And of course, University of Arizona has done that for a long time. Plus, they got their brick and mortar. We may, as these changes with education, we may actually see more universities just opting more for online and less interaction there.
Absolutely. So many changes.
Yeah.
So here's the chart for Seattle with Uranus ingressing into Gemini, and it's in the second house here. And then we'll go to the aspects, and we have Uranus is conjunct Venus there, just a few degrees away, and then sextile that Saturn and Neptune in Aries, and we've been talking a lot about that going on. And then trine Pluto in Aquarius, and opposite the moon in Sagittarius. So why don't you pick one of the aspects, Justin, and give us some information about that?
Well, I think why we show this chart, why I think this chart is important, because it sets the tone for what we go into. Of course, we'll talk about the first later on here, the lunar mansion, which sets the tone for as the planet ingresses. So I find this. I think we'll look back on this period, and we'll probably I'm kind of drawn to that sextile to the major conjunction with Saturn and Neptune happening, which is all about individualization. And I think that if we think about this period of that innovative Aries type, along with the innovative Uranus type in Gemini towards individualization, we could see in many ways businesses and things happening in society which are more geared towards the individual and with products and so on and so forth. So I think that's what I see with that.
Well, and with the opposition with the moon opposite Uranus and Venus, even though the moon moves pretty quickly and it is starting to separate from that, but with that trine to Pluto, that makes a point of Thales. So that moon looking at Uranus, that opposition, or Uranus is looking to the moon. So our emotions about, we could say foreign things or things at a distance, because Sagittarius is foreign and other countries and at a distance. And then the sextile from that moon to the Pluto is like, how are we going to resolve all that? And, through Pluto transforming things, and Pluto has been in a minor grand trine with Uranus and Saturn and Neptune, and that's lasting for quite some time, that energy. So it's like all these outer planets are in these configurations of, wanting to bring about change, but how do we settle it all out? It's like Uranus is kind of like, let's just blow it up.
Right. Well, and not to, and if we look a little bit at mundane astrology too, with individuals, I'll just briefly mention, I don't want to get into it, but really people should pay attention even more so to Trump's chart right now, because he does have a Sagittarius moon and he is a Gemini. And so I think this ingress is going to really affect that archetype that's happening in the collective. So people should kind of watch and see how this chart, this plays out for him.
Right. And as a planet, any planet, when it ingresses, we feel a big change because it was in Taurus. So Taurus is slow and Taurus doesn't want to make changes. Now it's in Gemini. Gemini is much more quicker, like Uranus is more quick. And, to me, it's like I think of Uranus as a higher octave of Gemini, because they both have a communication aspect to them. And so we have a sextile and a trine that's like they're communicating. Uranus is communicating with those outer planets. And the
Mm-hmm.
opposition with the moon is this kind of like quick. It happens real quick, just like a pause, and then we move on, because the moon moves about 12 degrees a day. So, a snapshot of that moment in time, it moves pretty quickly. So it doesn't seem like this is, anything major with Uranus ingressing into Gemini, as it's just kind of getting to know how does that feel? It's like having a new feeling. Anything you'd like to add?
Nope, I think you got it covered.
Okay. So Uranus, when it's retrograde, will retrograde back to 0 degrees Gemini on November 7th. So we have a few more aspects here. Uranus is still trine to Pluto, and it's sextile to Neptune, but Saturn's kind of separated from that conjunction, even though they're technically still conjunct, but it's Neptune in Ceres, that's sextile. And then we have two quincunxes, one to Venus and one to Vesta, forming a yod or finger of God, and then an opposition with Mercury and Mars. So this one's a little bit more interesting. So pick one and talk about it, Justin.
Well, I think we were just talking about the moon opposite, and now we're talking about the Mars opposite. And we know, as I mentioned before, and as an astrologer, I mean that when Mars aspects Uranus, there's a sudden shift, and it takes a risk, and people tend to make decisions quickly, and so it's this is a little bit of a caution here that there may be, I think that shows that there's apt to be some quick event, and then people step back from it. With Uranus going retrograde, there'll probably be some questioning about the direction of some things at that point. But that's what jumps out to me in that chart. That's pretty strong there. The Mercury, Mars, and Sagittarius opposite Uranus represents just this sudden risk-taking event.
Well, and then that would be kind of like, the apex of that yod is pointing to Uranus, but then the opposition is that Mars. So it, like, from some big change, then Mars could react, and that's how to alleviate it. So it'll be very interesting to see what occurs then. And isn't November 7th, isn't that the day of the bombing of Pearl Harbor? So we'll have an anniversary that day. So it'll be really interesting to see if anything surfaces about that, or anything in the past, from 84 years ago, that comes to light. So you ready to move on?
Yep.
Okay, and then Uranus will re-enter Gemini on April 25th of 2026. And this time, Uranus is conjunct Venus again. And then semi-square Mars in Aries. And square the moon in Leo. So before we had the moon opposite, now we have a square to the moon. And then sextile Neptune in Aries and Pallas Athena in Pisces. And trine Pluto and Juno in Aquarius. So would you like to jump in
Sure.
and talk about it?
Yeah, so again, what jumps out to me is the personal planets on this one. I don't know why this one is the personal planets are all sticking out with me, except for that first chart with Saturn. But here we got the moon again, squaring it, and then of course semi-square to Mars. That's definitely a tension point there, and so there could be again some need to take action. So if we put it in context of people's lives, I would say during this whole Uranus transit, when it squares Mars or the moon, or aspects that are difficult, hard aspects with the moon or Mars, people should pay attention and not taking risks at those times, and really how they're thinking. But it's more likely things people are going to do a lot of new ideas around that period of time as well. So
And for those that don't know, a semi-square is a half square. It's 45 degrees. Just because we haven't talked about semi-squares on here before, but I thought, well, it's kind of interesting because it has a very similar energy to a square. And, Uranus continues to be in a trine with Pluto, but Juno is joined up there with Pluto. So, kind of looking at things like how are our relationships changing? How are they working? How are they not working? So, maybe to make some changes to have better relationships in the future. It's just kind of a review of that period of time. And then we have that sextile that's been going on with Neptune, but Pallas Athena joins and Pallas is direct. So, how are we strategizing? How are the dreams and visions from that Neptune that we want to put into motion? How is the strategy? How has it been working and how has it not been working? Maybe we have to come up with a new plan to set it in motion.
Right.
Anything else you'd
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, to that point you made about the Uranus trining Pluto and Juno, and to me that's a really indicative of a major change in a relationship, um, and so that could be the time around when we were watching famous people around that time. That's when the famous couples break up, or politicians become enemies, or somebody falls from grace. That Uranus trining Juno right next to Pluto. There's something, relationship comes into play with that powerful dynamic there.
Well, and unexpected people joining together and coming into relationships, so it kinda
Yeah.
works both ways.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Justin's gonna share the nakshatra.
Yeah, the lunar mansion or nakshatra that's present at that 0 degrees Gemini in the Western tradition is going to be Kritika, and at the third pada, which is the Namsa, is Aquarius. It's ruled the third pada is always an air sign, and in this case, we're talking about Uranus, the modern ruler of Aquarius there. And so, we have the Navamsa that it moves into. The Pada is ruled by Aquarius, and it has a humanitarian feel to it. But this nakshatra is ruled by the deity Agni, who's the god of fire, and represents purging or cutting off something. And that's why the symbol is the knife blade or sharp instruments. For example, this is prominent in Prince Harry's chart, and was very glaring when he cut himself off from the family, or when they cut him off. And it can represent in a personality a person that's it's easier to do that with, or that's a soul's lesson they go through. And so this actually, I think this it rules one of his planets, and was prominent during that period. So, but from a mundane astrology perspective, this is a time when, because it does represent this change, and like, okay, we no longer need this. It's something we don't no longer need. Let's cut it off. Let's purge it. So this is the energy that Uranus moves into at the 0 degrees Gemini. Now it will change, but this is how we start the period off with.
Well, I like that because the purging and the cutting, it's like you could have a subscription to some newsletter or magazine and you don't really read it. So it's like, well, why am I getting this to clutter up my house? Or I don't read it anyway. So it's like time to just release it. I like that.
Yeah.
Now we're going to talk about the Sabian symbols. They were channeled in 1925 by spiritualist medium Elzie Wheeler. The Sabian symbols were channeled with the assistance of Mark Edmund Jones, an astrologer, writer, and actor. And Mr. Jones believed that Elzie had tapped into the ancient mind matrix. Each saying is a symbolic image for each degree of the zodiac. And we're going to start out with the Sabian symbols for Uranus's ingress into 0 Gemini. And we're going to start with the one before the degree of, and then the next one. So, Justin, will you lead us off?
Sure. So one of the things I might say for folks who are watching this, that usually when a planet is going from one element into another element. It's finishing up something. And we see that with the Sabian symbols here, where a lot of times that 30-degree, which is actually still is technically 0 degrees, 30, because there is no 30-degree planet, so it's a 0-degree aspect. There seems to be some cliff or leaping off or finishing up something. And in this case, Taurus 30 degrees is a peacock parading on the terrace of an old castle. The keynote is the personal display of inherited gifts, or key phrase is consummation. And Mark Edmund Jones actually saw this aloofness, but that as we move from out of Taurus, it's not being so set in our ways that we can't change here, that and not being so haughty and full of oneself that they can't see what's coming next. And I love what you put here. The peacock is the bird consecrated to Venus, and we see Venus very prominent with this ingress right next to Uranus.
Yeah, I thought it was important to leave there because I found that very interesting. Then Gemini 1 is a glass-bottomed boat, reveals underwater wonders. And the keynote is the revolution of unconscious energies and submerged psychic structures. And the key phrase is a new dimension of reality is perceived by the earnest inquirer. And it's like, if you've ever been on a glass bottom boat, it's like very interesting what you can see, where if you're just standing on the boat and you look over, you can see quite a bit if it's really clear, but it just changes the whole picture. And even scuba diving, it even changes that much more. So I really resonate with this Sabian symbol.
Yeah, and when people have that first degrees of Gemini, it's almost childlike. It's like this new dimensional reality, a revelation of unconscious energies. It's very childlike.
Well, and it's like the water, you can be on a boat in the water and it's like there's still another world there. It's kind of hidden in a way, so I love it. Okay, and then if you'll share Gemini 2 with us.
So this is what it's moving towards. The Santa Claus furtively, like filling stockings, hanging in front of the fireplace. Can't talk today. The key word here is a reward, faith in spiritual blessings, and of course the key phrase is a state of innocence, sort of the young child again with these first degrees of Gemini.
Yeah, children always look forward to Santa Claus coming and bringing them a present that they hope that they get at least one, if not more.
Right. So it's almost like, it feels like to me as we move into this Uranus Ingress that the world is about ready to give us a bunch of new gifts, and there's going to be a lot of revelation of new experiences that we can't even fathom yet.
Right. I like the new dimension of reality. It's like, things that we maybe thought weren't possible will be possible, or,
Yeah.
It's almost like it feels like the sky's the limit in some way.
Yeah.
Okay, and then now we're doing something new. We're going to look at the opposite degree of the Uranus ingress, and we're going to start with Scorpio 30. Children in Halloween costumes indulge in various pranks. And the keynote is the periodic outlets society furnishes within traditional limits to still immature energies. And the key phrase is relief from tension. So, this one to me speaks of innocence and play. What about you?
Yeah, well, I first want to explain to folks why we're doing the opposite. This is a technique that both Mark Edmund Jones and Dane Rudyard suggested, because it gives you a juxtapose to the other Sabian symbol, and it helps us understand it better. That's why we're doing that. And so the Scorpio 30 degrees, it's opposite of that peacock one, right? And I think, this is talking about the periodic outlets society furnishes within traditional limits to still immature energies. And I think we were talking about there's a little immaturity with the peacock there, a little bit full of himself. But I think this is sort of like letting us know that something's coming, this relief from tension. And I love how it talks about children in Halloween costumes. There's that to me says there's something that's hidden that that's around the corner.
And then if you'll do Sagittarius 1.
Yeah, Sagittarius 1 degree is retired Army veterans gathered to reawaken old memories. The keynote on this one is the will to reaffirm the value of struggle upon which civilizations and group achievements are founded, I mean. And so it's a perpetuation. And so this kind of gives us sort of this understanding of deeper philosophy of humanity that, and of course, this was on that first degree of the glass boat, and so it's really looking at the deeper revelation of why we struggle as civilizations, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, Palestinians, Israelis, you name it. What is it that underlines us? What's the value of the struggle, and why do we struggle? And I think it's part of that, saying that we're always looking for something new there in a way.
And then Sagittarius 2 is white-capped waves display the power of wind over sea. And the keynote is mobilization of unconscious energies under the pressure of super personal motives. And the key phrase is stabilization through rhythmic intensity. So it's like here we have another one with the water. So we've had, one on each of them with the water, and, the children in Halloween costumes, and then we had Santa Claus. So it's like, to me, they're all kind of interconnecting and telling a bigger story. It's like things can be hidden in plain sight, because if you're on a glass bottom boat, if you didn't have the glass bottom, you wouldn't be able to see what was in that water. And so it's like it's available to us, but we just have to look and be aware
Right.
of it.
This one's actually opposite of the Santa Claus one, because that was the last one there of Gemini 2 degrees. Now we got Sagittarius 2 degrees, and it's interesting. The keynote here is that about personal motives and that energy, and we saw within the Santa Claus that kind of like with the story where he puts his finger to his nose, and with a wink, there's something that's hidden that we don't know, that's part of the motive there, where it's flirting and saying something's coming. And so I think there's a particular energy and rhythmic intensity to that's letting us know about this energy of the Uranus in Gemini.
Boy, and through the Sabian symbols, it's like pay attention to your surroundings, because there's surprises and gifts that are going to come to the surface, I would say.
Yeah.
So we're going to look at the United States chart on the inside, and we're using the Sibley chart. And then on the outer chart, we're using the Uranus Ingress for Washington, D.C. So that happens at 3:47 a.m. on July 7th. And the U.S. is coming up to a Uranus return. It won't happen until, I think it was July of 2027, but it's getting close, so that it's in the same sign as the U.S. Do you want to comment on that, Justin?
Yeah, so it happens the exact Uranus return for the United States, because the United States has Uranus in Gemini, and the exact and it's at a 8.55 degrees Gemini. That happens exactly on July 26, 2027, 2 years from this month. And then what happens is that that year, after the United States had the first pass by it, in October, November timeframe, Uranus will go retrograde, and it goes back over that Gemini, back past the 8 degrees. And then in the next year, in May of 2028, it does the second pass exact over in May. And then that'll be the end of the exact degree of the Uranus return for the United States. So I love this chart because I don't know about you, Liz, but there's so much happening here, and I think it's pretty dynamic. What jumps out to you about this ingress here, and how it kind of maybe gives us a heads up about something?
Well, and on July 4th, just a few days ago, we had a solar return for the United States, and we just had a Jupiter return. So it's like there's a lot of planets returning to their natal locations of when the United States was formed. So to me, I always think of when those planets return as it's kind of like an upgrade time. It's like review what how that planet's been acting or how it plays out, and then like how can we make it better or how can it be changed? Because we just had a Pluto return a few years back, and so not too much in the distance past. So it's like, and then the planets are changing into um, fire and air, so it's really activating everything for the United States, but even on a personal level, it's activating us all too.
Yeah, I would agree. And, for the folks that are wondering, what does the Jupiter return mean? Well, Jupiter returns in anybody's chart, which happens every 12 years, is about growth. Because Jupiter expands and it's a planet of good fortune. So it's about growth. And of course, it's in Cancer, which represents family and tribalism. And of course, we could see that's a huge issue right now in the United States. But and of course we've got just to point it out, we got the Jupiter return, we got the south transiting south node on US Neptune, that ninth house. Of course, ninth house from mundane astrology perspective being the judiciary. Of course, that's a big story going on right now. And then the biggie coming up, I would even say this is, to me, more bigger than the Uranus return, which will be in a couple of years. But it's that Pluto going to hit the south node in Aquarius in the second house of values, where we're, like you said, there's this review of things. And so definitely a chart to watch and to see how it plays out here.
Oh, absolutely. And we will come back in 2027, if not before, to talk about the US Uranus return. So, and we have other shows too. So is there anything else you want to comment on the US Sibley chart?
No, that's all I would say.
And then Justin has a quote for us, and I'm going to let him tell it.
Sure. So when we think of Uranus, and I'm not sure what you think, Liz. What's probably, I know you like that word, the rebel. It's rebellion and change, and it's that uniqueness, inventiveness, and so Nikola Tesla, who was known for his being a rebel and being an inventor, I thought it was good to kind of put. And he was a futurist as well. He saw a lot of things happening in the future. I love this quote. He said, "Invention is the most important product of man's creative brain. The ultimate purpose is the complete mastery of mind over the material world, the harnessing of human nature to human needs." And I think this may play out over the next few years here as we go through this Uranus return.
Right. It's like, how can we change the future, or how can we grow the future? What's it going to look like?
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank our audience for joining today, and those that come back and watch at a later time. I want to thank you, Justin, for joining me today and talking about Uranus into Gemini. Anything you'd like to say as a
Well,
last comment?
yeah, I was gonna say, for those watching and like how to take advantage of this would be to see where this transit through Gemini is in your own chart, and this is the area in your own life. If it's in the place of career, I would say this is the time where this transit may have a big change in your career, and it may be thinking of new ways of a career. And if it's in the fifth house, this is a great time for writing. If it's in your fourth house, well, you're probably going to move during this period or have some changes or be thinking about new ways of doing something different as far as the home goes. So a good way to take advantage of this is embrace change wherever Gemini is in your chart, and be open to the new opportunities that it presents.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Justin and I both do consultations and have newsletters and YouTube channels, so we appreciate you subscribing and hiring us to do a consult for you. And I'll let Justin tell you about his slide here.
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me for a consult is just to email me at justin.elzie@gmail.com. And I appreciate that. Thanks.
And then we will both be on Talk Cosmos on July 20th, talking about the Leo new moon using archetypal symbols. And I want to thank our sponsor, Astro Peregrine Software. And if you'd like a demo, you can book one at astroperegrine.com/buy-now/. And again, thank you, Justin, for joining me. And thanks to the audience. And we're going to say goodbye now and see you next time.